Well, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to say thanks to everyone for coming out this afternoon. It's going to be a great talk. For those that didn't read the full bio, I'll just give you an introduction to Dr. Tim Coombs. But Dr. Coombs is going to be talking today on sports crisis communications and industry effect on crisis communication. And Dr. Coombs is a full professor in the Department of Communication at Texas A&M University. He is also an honorary professor in the Department of Business Communication at Aarhus University, which is in Denmark, which I brutalized the name, I know. His research expertise is in crisis communication, and his works appear in various publications and journals. He also has authored 2 books on crisis communication. Coombs was the 2002 recipient of the Jackson and Wagner Behavioral Science Prize from the Public Relations Society of America, the 2013 Pathfinder Award from the Institute of Public Relations in recognition of his research contributions to the field and to the practice, and the 2014 Business Impact Award from the Association of Business Communication, and is a member of the Arthur W. Page Society. He has co-authored crisis research, has won multiple Pride awards from the Public Relations Division of the National Communications Association for his books and articles, and has worked with governments, corporations, and consulting firms in the US, Asia, and Europe on ways to improve crisis communication efforts for themselves and their clients. He is also the editor of the Corporate Communication an international journal. So it is really very much a pleasure and an honor to have Dr. Coombs speak to us today. And so with no more further ado, I'll turn it over, and let's give him a big round of applause.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you could all come out today. This is really a joy for me to come back. It's nice and beautiful here, much different than where I live in Texas, where it's kind of flat and ugly. At least it's green. It's a little bit wet here, but it's a lot better. And the last time I was here, it was great to kind of meet and talk with people and get a nice exchange of ideas. So hopefully that'll happen again today. And today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. It's still similar. It's crisis, but we're going to talk about it in sports and kind of why sports. And I want to get to that in just a minute. But one of the things that people in sports like are statistics. And we just had the Winter Olympics we just had. In the U.S., we kind of like the Summer Olympics better because, we don't usually do so well in the Winter Olympics. So. Because this past year, Norway was the big winner. Norway had the most medals. But if you change statistics way, actually Norway wasn't number 1. Instead, if you look at the number of medals per million people in your city, or in your country, the number 1 would be Liechtenstein. Because they have such a small population, they won 1 medal, but that would actually be 26 medals if they had 1 million people. And Norway was just at 7 per 1 million people. So Liechtenstein, by that metric, worked out. And there are other numbers you can look at when you start talking about the Winter Olympics. And another number that stands out is 4. And 4 right now is the number of athletes that have tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. That number will probably go up. So you had 2 Russians, one was a curler, one was in bobsledding. I'm not quite sure why the guy needed it in curling, but he did. There was a Japanese speed skater and then a Slovakian hockey player, all kind of tested positive. And so that was an issue. But as kind of a point of more trivia, the first time an athlete was stripped of a medal for a performance-enhancing drug was in 1968. And he lost his bronze medal. And the man's name, I want to get this right, was Hans Gunnar Liljenvall. And he was a modern pentathlete. And his performance-enhancing drug was 2 beers that he drank to steady himself before the shooting event in the modern pentathlon. But that cost him. And since then, we've seen a lot more athletes test. I said 4 in this past game, and that will probably go up. But that leads me to the topic of this notion of these crises in sports. And this is a crisis when, here you are, an athlete, and you've tested positive. And we're going to look at some case studies today. Because what I want to talk about is the way that sports is a unique industry. And within that unique industry, crisis communication is going to look a little bit different than it does in the corporate world. There are a lot of similarities, but there are enough differences to matter. And I want to talk about those differences. And we're going to start by just talking a little bit about sport in general and why that matters, why sport as an industry matters. And then I want to talk some about organizations teams and when they have crises, but I want to focus mostly on the individual athletes when they have crises, what are called athlete reputational crises or ARCs. And I want to use a number of case studies to kind of walk you through that, see why this is such a different world from the corporate one, especially when we start talking about these individual athletes and these ARCs in terms of what's going on. But I want to start by talking about this notion of crisis going on in sports and sports as an industry. Early on, every 2 years we have this big international crisis conference. And I remember at the second one, there was a researcher, and he was presenting his research on crises in sports. And people were going, why sports? Who cares about sports? Why don't you talk about corporations, big businesses? This sports stuff, that's like a hobby. It's like, be serious with your research. Like, really? Why are they so down on sports? And soon, later on after that, we started to see a lot more people interested in sports and crisis. And it started coming in, and I would get asked to review these pieces for journals on sports communication journals. Like, I'm not a sports communication specialist, but it's all about crisis now, and they're interested in that. And I have actually worked with 2 people in sports communication, and in August we're having an edited book come out all about crisis in sports. So obviously we actually do think it's important. And if you start looking at the numbers, and again, that's where we need to go, we got to look at the numbers, we can see it is important. Because even though people dismiss sports at first, like, oh, well, you want to do that because you like sports, like you like to watch football or you like to watch baseball, Well, no, it's not really about that. It's about money, and it's about fans. And the fans are what really makes and differentiates sports crisis from everything else, are the fans. Because as much as they wanted, corporations don't really have fans like we have fans. I mean, yeah, you can occasionally find someone who gets a tattoo of Nike just because they love Nike. But think how many people have tattoos of their favorite sports teams. And when they win a championship, they get that tattoo. It's like, I'm not into that, but if you like that, that's great. That's good. That's part of what's going on. But I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about the money. If we look at it in terms of the values of the teams, here are the highest values from about a year ago of professional sports teams globally. And if you look on the far right, that's billions of dollars. Many corporations would like to aspire to that. So if you look at the top 10, there's a tie, so that's why there's 2 number 9s, $3 billion each in valuation. Well, that's not a hobby. That's not something to sneeze at. These are major businesses. When they have problems, this can impact their price. Yes, they don't have stockholders, but they do have people who are invested in them, and there's money to be made or money to be lost from these. And if we look at the sports revenue overall for the industry, what we find, and this is in 2016, the value is $67 billion US, and that's going to rise to over $78 billion. And so you're looking at steady growth rates. Industries would love to have this. That, oh yeah, look at my growth rate. It's going up, up. The revenues are going up. Even in something like the Olympics that is having trouble sometimes getting sponsorship, they're still seeing their revenues go up as a result of that. And the global sports industry has the fastest growing over than the GDPs. So again, if you look at the statistics, it's growing, it's growth, it's out there, it's important, it matters if nothing else from a financial point of view, which is why that initial dismissal of, oh, sports, that's just hobbies and stuff. Well, yeah, if we were talking about badminton, maybe, but we're talking multi-billion-dollar industries that are out here, and they do have crises, and they need to think about those crises. So we have to think about this seriously about sports crises, and that was one of the impetus behind the book. And through that book, we brought in a lot of authors from a lot of different areas to talk about different types of sports and crises in various sports to try and get a better understanding of this. Because as I said, the key, and what goes back to the title of the presentation, is sports is a unique industry. And even if we look at sports teams, which are corporations to a large degree, they have a couple of unique features, and we'll start kind of talking about them. Because when we talk about sports crises, you have the teams crises, but you also have athlete crises. And an athlete crisis can be a crisis for a larger organization, whether it be a team or an association, but at the root of it, it's that athlete and that athlete's crisis. Because that athlete is also, on their own, a business. And as we'll see, there can be a lot of money on the line there. So I want to start again with a little bit about the teams, and we'll get into the case studies with the athletes to kind of look on what's going on with them. They're nearly identical to other organizations in crisis. They operate very similarly, but there are two important differences. And the first one is an asset, and that's the fans. Fans are supportive. They love you, and when you're in a crisis, they come to your aid. And so if you're a sports fan and your team's in crisis, where do you go to support them? Yeah, you're going to go online. You're going to say, oh, I love the team. The team's great. Don't worry about this. Put this behind you. We're going to keep going forward. And that's what they found. The researchers did. In the United States, probably the worst crisis a sports team has had was Penn State University, and the sexual abuse that went over through decades was kind of like, it was similar to the Catholic Church in the U.S. It went on for a very long period of time, so it was very horrific. Their fans went online and supported them. They weren't supporting the coach, but they were supporting the program, saying, we have a proud tradition. We need to still be fans. This is really important. Go Penn State football. And people outside were like, oh, these people are awful. I was like, no, they're fans. They're not saying supporting the bad coach. They're supporting the team. And so unless you have a repeat of crises, they're going to support you. What happens is, over time, if you keep doing bad things, even your fans eventually say, no, that's enough. I'm kind of out. I'm not going to support you anymore. They'll probably still follow the team, but they're not going to publicly support you. So it's great. I mean, it makes it a lot easier to manage a crisis when you have supportive fans behind you, because that's, they're going to reinforce you. They're going to keep you going and help you kind of motivate through the crisis. Accountability can be a problem, though, because in sports you have monopolies. We'll talk a little bit about FIFA and then the NFL. You probably all know about the problems in FIFA. FIFA had some kind of issues with corruption and those sorts of things. This is one of my favorite images. Sepp Blatter, this was an activist, threw money in front of him, threw these dollars in front of him to kind of make a point about FIFA and how corrupt FIFA was. Well, Sepp didn't have to worry, because who's going to hold him accountable? He's the head of FIFA. FIFA has the World Cup. Are people not going to go to the World Cup? Not likely. Are people not going to watch the World Cup on television? No. So they're still going to get all the television revenue. Are cities not going to bid for World Cups? No, they're going to do that. So there's no reason for Sepp to change. Who's going to pressure Sepp? He's got his little kind of group of cronies together. They're making a lot of money, all kind of under the table deals. So there's no accountability there above him. It took a while for that to occur. And it took the sponsors to come in, because the sponsors are the money people. So in addition to the television revenue, which is a huge chunk of the money that FIFA is going to make, they need sponsors. And they have some high-level sponsors. And among them, Visa was one of the sponsors among them. And the sponsors can say, we're going to take our money out. And now we've got some accountability. Because you're standing to lose sponsors, and that's not a good look, because we're going to lose money, and if one sponsor goes, more could go. And in fact, this was one of the key headlines. FIFA key sponsors, Visa, Adidas, Coca-Cola, pile pressure in the wake of a corruption scandal. They wanted it cleaned up. So they're telling FIFA, they're telling Blatter, you got to get rid of it. You don't get rid of this, you don't fix this, we're leaving. You're going to have problems replacing us. High-level sponsors like this, it's going to be hard to attract when you're in the middle of a scandal. It's just not going to work out very well for them. So these are what made the changes. And I remember when this was breaking, I did an interview with BBC Radio, and they were saying, well, what's going to make this change? And this was before this part happened. I said, the sponsors. So the sponsors are the only one who can make this change. They only have the pressure, because the fans aren't going to leave. It's not right to say, oh, I'm not going to watch my favorite national team play in the World Cup because I'm mad at Sepp Blatter. No, you love your team, so you're going to watch FIFA, and you're going to play FIFA on PlayStation. So that wasn't going to be it. It's the sponsors that had to do it. And so that's very much different. Corporations don't have sponsors. They're more held accountable by you and I, by the customers who might have issues. When people were upset, say, with Volkswagen, when they didn't like the fact they kind of put that software in that tricked, admissions, they thought, that's probably not what you want in a car. If you're buying a car because you're environmentally conscious, you don't want to realize, oh, gee, I was just really bad the whole time. My car lied to me and everyone else. That's different. No sponsorship having it in your wake. And here was, again, more about that they actually forced the resolution. That's what led to the change. Now, is FIFA less corrupt than it was before? Probably, but that's not saying much, right? They're going from maybe a 10 corruption to an 8, but that's still progress. But it's being made because of the sponsorship, and that's a different category that they have to deal with. But what about the athletes? These are the ones we see more commonly, actually, with the athletes, what's going on. Again, we're still talking about a lot of money changing hands here and being at stake. But there's an interesting dynamic with the athletes that are going on. And this whole set of other factors, what we're going to talk about, this concept of contextual modifiers. It's a big term, but you kind of see it's really an easy idea when we start talking about it. See what they're up against. And I want to start talking a little bit about and then start getting into some cases of real athletes and see what they go and how they talk and what they say and they do during crisis communication. It's different than companies. It's very different in those regards. This is the idea that we want to focus on athletes who are engaged in some kind of crisis. Some athletes are just in an individual sport, but some are individuals within team sports. We're going to kind of lump those together because they still matter for it. And these are what are called athlete reputational crises. And this is what has been known, again, as the ARC. And this is the formal definition of an ARC. Make of it what you will. We're going to kind of unpack what this really means here. It's an event caused by unintentional or intentional on or off-field behavior that threatens to disrupt an athlete's reputation. What's critical here is for athletes, reputation equates with financial. We know that that's the same thing in the corporate world. A corporation's reputation is equal to money. But there's a much more direct route when you're an athlete. When you're an athlete and your reputation is strong, your endorsement deals are strong, your revenue is high. You, for some reason, have a reputational problem. Now you're looking at very significant and immediate financial loss. Corporations are going to feel that over time and much more indirectly. But you're going to see this very directly when you start talking about the athletes that are out there. And this is kind of what it looks like for them. They essentially have identified there are 4 different types of ARCs. And some of these are easy to deal with, and some of these are hard to deal with. All right, when you have the unintentional non-performance off the field behavior, you do something stupid. You get a speeding ticket. Maybe you get caught smoking marijuana if you're in the U.S. and you're not supposed to be doing that. We've had some athletes who have been suspended 2, 3, 4 years in a row because they just can't seem to stop smoking marijuana. But that's off field, and it's not really intentional, and they're not really trying to hurt anyone. And on the other side, you have intentional performance on the field. That's performance-enhancing drugs. That's the worst kind. That's not tolerated by the fans or anyone because that violates the sanctity of the game and the sports. But you can also have intentional non-performance off the field, and you can have unintentional performance on the field. And that's kind of a weird one. You didn't mean to have it happen, but we're going to look at a case where that's what a lot of athletes claim, like, I didn't know I was taking that. I thought it was an herbal supplement. I didn't know it was a human growth hormone. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but we'll see kind of what shapes a lot of that. And again, we'll walk through some of these as well. Like the intentional non-performance off the field, you might do something. A lot of what Tiger Woods did before he got in trouble, that was intentional. He was hiding it from his wife and other golfers in terms of what he was doing. But that was off the field. That was his private life. That he wasn't doing that on the golf course. And so that's different. So we'll see what this matters in terms of intensity and then how you have to actually kind of manage your crisis as you go about. And here are some of the key factors I want to start with. And talk about some these general ones and then get into some more specific ones which will lead us to the cases. And I want to see if you remember some of these athletes in the cases here. Non-performance off the field are usually considered less severe. Particularly when they wrote the article about ARCs, they said, those are the easy ones to take care of. But sometimes, maybe it's not so good. You were caught drunk driving, or you smashed your sports car and you left the scene. No one was hurt, but you leave your car there. That happened a professional football player in the U.S. was driving at 3 in the morning and smashed his like $500,000 car into a sign and left the scene. You're not supposed to do that. That's bad. Right? But it's not too bad. What they failed to consider, though, is we have to start thinking now about outrage. And yeah, if you smash up your car and you walk away, that's not a big deal because that's only you. That's not risking someone else. Now, you have a drunk driving accident that injures someone, well, now we're starting to get a little bit more outraged. And to be much more specific about that, domestic abuse, counter that with smoking marijuana. In some states in the United States, that's illegal. But if you're in pretty much any of our major sports, it's not illegal. And the athletes are kind of upset about that. Because, well, if I live in Colorado, it's illegal for me to smoke this. Why am I then getting tested for this? Why should that matter? That's very minor. That's a kind of personal preference types of issues. But domestic abuse, a very serious issue. And this goes back to the whole notion of accountability. And that's when, I mentioned that it was FIFA and the NFL. The NFL has a lot of players. I don't have the exact statistics right now, but the statistics tend to be staggering of the number of players on each NFL team that have some sort of charges of domestic abuse in their past or are currently pending against them. That's a very serious crime, and that has really been raised and given a much higher profile now. And I don't think you can say that that is something that can be easily dealt with. That's a non-performance issue, but think about the outrage. Players involved in domestic abuse often find themselves out of the league. Although if you're good enough, maybe you get back in. And that's one of the factors we're going to talk about, is what is your bankability. The main focus of all this was a player by the name of Ray Rice. Ray Rice was a good player. Near the end of his career, if this happens, he's gone. He hasn't played since. A lot of people say that that's probably what he deserved. Had Ray Rice been at the prime of his career, that's another matter, whether or not a team picks him up or not. And so the individual and the team can kind of come together. So this was one of the points, and I think we need to look more at is the type of non-performance that goes on. There's a difference between that, or let's say you're in a bar and you wind up in a small skirmish that's unintentional. You just get in a little bit of fight. Players do that too. What's amazing is what you learn from these types of crises is how often NBA players are at strip clubs at 2 in the morning. It's quite all right. And you start just thinking, that's probably a bad idea. Maybe a team should talk to them about that, have a curfew on strip clubs for them. Another thing is the nature of the violation. Because we're dealing here oftentimes with rules of sports, when we're talking about on the field types of behaviors here. Some of you can have clear violations of rules. Yes, that violated the rule. No, it didn't. Other times it's a gray area. It's like, well, is that really covered or not covered? Maybe we need to sort this out. And that was the NFL's problem when they responded to domestic abuse. They're like, oh, well, we're not quite sure about this. What really should we do? And people are going, are you serious? You don't know what you should do? It's like, well, it's not really in our policies. It's like, well, put it in. Do something about it. But there are also some union rules that they have to deal with. But some things are clear, some things aren't. And that's where a lot of athletes say, well, this whole testing me for performance-enhancing drugs, that's a gray area. Not as gray as it should be, as they think it is. You're like, well, can you trust these tests? That's what they always challenge the test. Like, well, I think their testing is bad. Yeah, that's it. It's the testing that's bad. As the testing gets more sophisticated, they catch more and more because there's a lot of sort of designer type of drugs at work there for the performance enhancing there. So the gray areas can be less. This is the concept contextual modifiers, and they increase the likelihood that a crisis response will be effective, and they're just general factors that push people towards specific outcomes. And what I want to do is I want to give you some examples of these and then talk about the cases. You can kind of see what this looks like in reality for it. And there's really kind of a set of 5 here. There are the fans. The fans matter. Whether fans love you or fans hate you, that's great. Fans being indifferent towards you, not a good thing. Now, on the corporate side, actually people being indifferent towards you can be helpful in a crisis, but not if you're an athlete. You really want support or oppose. The systems, that could be a team, that could be your league, that can be your sponsors, just some larger organization. Where do they stand? Are they going to be willing to support you and help you and think this is all right? Or are they not going to support you? Again, you're not having these sorts of issues for corporations. Economic factors. Can you generate income? Which also generates, can you help, if it's a team sport, can you help my team win? In the U.S., we had Alex Rodriguez, who got suspended for his use of performance-enhancing drugs. When he came back, the fans finally embraced him because he started playing well again. He's now since retired, but these things matter. Visibility of athletes. Athletes are unusually visible. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. And then this idea of career threat or just career interruption can become quite critical to some choices that athletes make when they do that. I want to start out with the media here. Now, if we were to take a quiz, could you tell me who the CEOs of these major companies in Canada are? So we have the Royal Bank of Canada, Power Corporation of Canada, and Manulife. How many people could name all those? Okay, and that's the CEO. I didn't even ask for like the CFO, or like some midline manager that's in there. Now, could you name like a star player for the Vancouver Canucks? More could. Some people don't like hockey. Or someone who played for the Toronto Blue Jays or the Montreal Canadiens. Right? Now, you would know this. And you could probably even cite like long-term, like who was the greatest player for the Canadiens ever, and you could debate that. Now, could you debate who were the greatest CEOs ever of the Royal Bank of Canada? No, you don't sit around, talking about that at a restaurant or a bar, but you talk about players. And as a result of that, the media knows that, and so the media likes to cover sports figures, and not just on the sports page. When there's a crisis, that's news. Wow, that's going to get a lot of attention. Even if the athlete's not that prominent, it's still going to get a lot of play and attention. Now, if you have a problem going on and one of your mid-level managers in one of these companies, the media may never even talk about it because somebody got fired in the middle management of Power Corporation of Canada. Where does that rate versus, okay, they're not a starter, but they're an important sub player for the Montreal Canadiens. Ooh, now that's going to get attention. There's going to be more. The media likes to talk about sports here. So kind of talk about some cases. We're going to start with some denial. Why so much denial in sports? That's the crisis communication one there. And then we're going to look at not denial case, sort of, not really, and then a final one that was clearly not a denial. Do you remember who she is? Marion Jones. Marion Jones in her day, greatest female sprinter that was out there, could win the 100, 200, did a lot of relays, was also a long jump champion, was a former also college basketball player. Now, Marion Jones had a fantastic Olympics in 2000. She won 5 medals with multiple relays. So she was in 100 to 200 relays, so forth. First accusations of her using performance-enhancing drugs came out in 2001, and that was from a blood test. So they tested her blood, and as an athlete, man, they keep your blood around a long time. So they might not be able to find it this year, but if that testing improves, they're going to find you later. So they can come back. Like, you can think you haven't made, you won a medal, and it's been 8 years, and then suddenly you get the calls like, hey, we tested your blood. Guess what we found? Like, going to bring that medal back. But it's really strange, though, for the athlete who then gets that medal, because they just they send it to them. There's no big ceremony. It's like, oh, you now have, the silver medal. Like, okay. Who knows that you get it. In her prime, she could earn millions of dollars through her endorsement deals. She could make up to $80,000 per race. And so when you're talking whether you are she would be prominently featured. These figures would be mostly there's some indoor, but it's mostly outdoor. So you're looking at running the outdoor circuit, which there's one now that spans the globe. It used to only be in Europe, and now it spans Asia, Europe, the United States. You're probably making about $500,000 if you're going to all these races and getting these appearance fees. So that's just for appearing in the race. And if you are then the champion of what had been the Golden League, there's also bonus money on top of that for the year-end finishers. So we're not talking about little bits of money. We're talking about large sums of money. because very quickly, once athletes in these events, what we typically think of track and field, became professional, the money came with it. The money came fast. In 2007, 6 years after she was found, she was first charged, she admits this in a letter to her family and close friends. She used steroids before the Sydney Games. So she gets stripped of all of her medals. Marion Jones pleads guilty in drug case, retires. Yeah, can't compete anymore, right? You've been banned as a result of this. This is a career-ending one. This was going to be it for her. This was over. So the $1 million a year, gone. The appearance fees, gone. And she actually has to serve jail time because she lied under oath. So it's not that taking performance-enhancing drugs in and of themselves don't get you into jail, but lying to investigators, that will get you into jail. And so she actually did time. So it's kind of interesting because you have her talking about how adamant she is. She didn't do anything wrong. She will be vindicated. And so, 6 years later, she's admitting it. She's going to jail. And she does this video appeal and kind of reading this letter, kind of saying how sorry she is about all of this. Here's someone else. Cyclists are harder to identify. Yeah. No. Lance is handsomer than this. This is Floyd Landis. Floyd was also one. He's not as prominent as Lance Armstrong. So yeah, but there he is. He's won, and he wins the Tour de France in 2006. I had to look this up. I didn't remember. I knew he'd won, but I don't remember what year. I don't follow cycling that carefully. He tested positive for a performance-enhancing drug on his primary sample, but there was going to be a follow-up done on his secondary sample. He used what was called the whiskey defense. He said that before they took his blood sample, he was celebrating and drinking a lot of whiskey, and his doctor told him that when you drink a lot of whiskey, it can raise your testosterone production. That was his defense, all right? It was the whiskey defense. And he actually wrote a book, Positively False, Floyd Landis, The Real Story of How I Won the Tour de France. Adamant he did not do this. 4 years later, he drops the appeal and he says, yeah, I did it, and his career's over. And Floyd goes away. Floyd now runs, for lack of a better term, an alternative medicine center for athletes somewhere, the exact state, somewhere down in the South, but Floyd disappears. So the money's gone. The fame's gone. This is it. The career is over. There wasn't coming back for this from Floyd Landis. What we see here is a clear pattern. We see denial, we see fighting, and then we see, oh, yeah, you caught me. I did it. Because you're going to have an initial testing positive that's going to lead that, but you're going to think, no, there's something wrong there. They need to test my other samples. I've been clean. And then you fight it. You use all kinds of arguments. Floyd Landis and his attorneys challenged the drug testing process. They challenged the chain of evidence, saying, well, we don't know who had that blood and who might have tampered with his blood between the time you took it and the time you tested it. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there, Floyd, who really want to tamper with your blood because they're very jealous of what you've done. But it's this type of language and this type of wording that's coming out. It's very odd. You'll see denial in the corporate world, but you don't see it for this long or for this period of time. And then, okay, now we got to admit that we're guilty, yeah, because the evidence is there. They're going to stand up over time, so they can no longer refute it. What we're seeing really here is that denial is sort of the last gasp for the athlete. Because in both of these cases, they know that the positive test is the end of the career. So that's it. Or are you going to move on to the next phase of your life? Jones went to prison. Floyd Landis does his alternative medicine type thing. I think it involves a lot of medicinal marijuana use, actually, what Floyd's doing these days. But because he's into the issue of kind of chronic pain, because he says he has some pain residual from the bike riding. So the arcs, these are kind of intentional and non-performance, or whether it's intentional and performance. The contextual modifier for this all is career ending. If this crisis is actually true, You did what you're said to have done. Your career's over. That's it. So we looked at two that were performance enhancing with Marion Jones and with Floyd Landis, and their careers are done. And I had mentioned earlier Ray Rice with the idea of domestic abuse, so that's a non-performance one. His career is over. And there's been a few other athletes who have had their careers over because of non-performance related as well. That's why you're going to deny. That we're really looking at a situation where denial, it's a dysfunctional response, but it's caused by the career threat. And that's different. If I'm Volkswagen and I got caught, that's not going to end my career. It's not like, ooh, I cheated with my software in my car. They're not going to let me make cars anymore. They're not going to let you make cars. All right, yeah, am I going to pay millions, billions of dollars for that? Yeah, I'm going to pay that. But I'm going to be around, and I'm going to regain my market share, probably in a year, which is about what it took. Because they could look at Toyota before them at the brake problem. Same thing. Toyota had an off year, but then they're back to where they would be. Strong companies keep going. There's not the same kind of career-ending threat for it. Now, might some executives have their careers ended? Yes. Do people care? Not really, because some other nameless, faceless CEO, he or she takes over, and life goes on in the corporation. But the athletes are different. When their career is gone, their career is really over. So that's a different type of threat. So that's when we talk about industries being unique. This is one of the unique features of it. And I've seen some other ones, like particularly the Floyd Landis case. People are like, how could he keep trying to deny? How could he not? Because the minute he says, I did it, then that's it. Does that make sense? You say, oh, wow, that's really kind of a concern for him. So, guidelines for optimal responses for ARCs. I want to talk a little bit about these guidelines and then go through some examples, some case examples, again, of athletes and how they go through that. Optimal is kind of your best option. Now, I don't want to use best practices because I don't really believe best practices exist. A lot of this is very situationally based in terms of what's going on. But optimally, what are some things I should give me a really good response or a good outcome if I'm thinking about it as an athlete? And for me, for an athlete, I can preserve my career to a degree, sort of what we can do for all this. Well, if you look at ARCs, if it's unintentional and it's minor non-performance, it's kind of easy to deal with. You have a lot of options. You can kind of minimize it, saying, yeah, it's not really that bad. And you can do adjusting information, saying, I'm fixing that. It's like, yeah, I've got a problem. I'm going to fix that. All right. When athletes have had some sort of experience where they have been arrested for drunk driving, you can almost bet that the first thing they're going to do is they're going to go into rehab. That's adjusting information. They're going to try and fix, like, yeah, I've been bad. I know that's a problem. I got to work on that. I'm going to go take care of that. And you can also have these unintentional performance ones. You didn't mean for this to happen. We're going to look at a case where I didn't know I was taking that stuff. Again, it's questionable, but we're going to see how fan support, system support will matter for me, even for an unintentional performance one, when we look at the case of that. There's a career interruption versus a career threat. That's different. Okay, if my career is just interrupted, I can take the hit. I can be responsible for this. And am I still revenue generating or not? So revenue generation, system support, and fan support are unique. We don't have that on the corporate side. But we do for these athletes. And this is going to matter to them whether or not some of these strategies, like minimizing and adjusting information, can work in these circumstances. And we're going to start, I want to show you a case of someone who's still active today and has actually had 2 cases where this has occurred. Do you recognize him? Yeah, Justin Gatlin, 100-meter specialist for the United States. Used to run the 200 meters, but he's old in terms of track and field years, so he's just concentrating on the 100 meters here. Justin Gatlin has had a very checkered career in the sport. In 2001 and 2006, he tested positive for banned substances. So in 2001, he had a 2-year ban, and he was using this substance was one for attention deficit syndrome. It can give you an advantage as a sprinter. He had been on this medication previously. I mean, that's very easy in the United States to find someone in high school who is on this type of medication. It's not uncommon. It's a very popular pharmaceutical drug. But it can give you an unfair ability in sprints because you can focus and helps with starts and that type of stuff. So he said, well, he was legally taking this, and then he didn't mean for that to be a banned substance, and he received a 2-year ban and came back. In 2006, though, he incurred a 4-year ban. It was originally an 8-year ban. An 8-year ban would have been a life term for him. As a sprinter, you only have so many years. But he was given a 4-year ban. Now, that's kind of tough. That's 4 years you're not out there. And that's 4 years, if you don't have a sponsor, how are you making a living? How are you still training? Well, Gatlin was able to still get some sponsorship deals, even though he was not allowed to compete at the time, but he was going to come back. That time, the banned substance was actually a performance-enhancing drug that was more related to human growth hormones. Like the first one, it was one of those, like, maybe it helps you, maybe it doesn't. It's one of those gray area ones. It's like, it's not that big of a deal. So he loses his world record. That's stripped from him. People largely write him off, but Gatlin views this as a career interruption. Okay, I went away for 2 years before I came back. I can come back from this, and he did, which was quite unusual because he was in his 30s, and that's usually not a prime time for a sprinter, particularly in 100 meters that you had. And so he came back and was challenging Usain Bolt towards the end. He accepts his punishment. So we're not going to say he didn't apologize, and he didn't really admit to anything. He just said, yeah, I'm going to take the ban, all right? He's not going to fight it, and that he was going to help them in their investigation. He was going to work with anti-doping officials. He argued that the system said, oh yeah, his first one was unintentional. Just that intention deficit. So that's not it. So we're going to support that. And because of that, and Gatlin offered to cooperate, the system was kind towards him. They said, okay, yeah, we'll give you 4 years. We're not going to make this really a lifetime ban, but yeah, because your stuff was unintentional. So again, the intentionality did matter. Again, you can question that, but the system is willing to support that, and that's what matters, because the system decides how long you're going to be out. 4 years, 8 years, huge difference in terms of what they are. As he comes back, he starts winning, he's bankable. And I just want to give you some of the statements made during this time period. Okay? I cannot account for these results. That was his second drug test. Because I have never knowingly used any banned substance or authorized anyone to administer such a substance to me. Right? He's like, no. It's like, I don't, how did this get in my body? It's magic. It just appeared there. Since learning of the positive test, I have been doing everything in my powers to find out what causes to happen. He argued that a massage therapist, unbeknownst to him, used testosterone cream on his legs. Will that lead to a positive? I don't know. I'm not in pharmacology. I don't know how that works. I have been and will continue to cooperate fully with USADA. That's the group that's actually doing all the drug testing. The group that's told the Russians you can't go to the Olympics. As part of it. As it moves forward with the process, it's initiated, and I hope that when all the factors are revealed, it will determine that I have done nothing wrong. Well, they didn't really find anything to exonerate him in this process. He's never admitted to doping and continued to insist his 2006 test came from a massage therapist rubbing testosterone cream on his legs. Wow, this is wild, but it worked. If a corporation had done this, if Volkswagen said, well, I think some engineers were rubbing stuff onto those parts, and they just magically kind of beat emissions. Like, look, that's crazy. That's ludicrous. How could you do that? But the system is supporting him, and he has some fan support too. And he has sponsors that are willing to say, yeah, we're going to do it. In fact, during his ban, he still kind of had some sponsorship deals. That's different, so it's working to help him that this kind of response can work. Like I said, this corporate world, this really kind of falls flat, but it worked for him in terms of what they're doing. So the lessons are, system support can be the primary factor. Association supported him. His key sponsor, Nike, came back. As soon as he's on the track, Nike's with him. And there's some talk that Nike might have been with him all along. Fans disliking athletes, but that draws fans. You need villains in sports. Gatlin's the villain. He comes out, and he was very open. He talked about how they booed him. Justin Gatlin was inspired to spoil Usain Bolt's party by the boos of the World Championship, claims a British sprinter. That's it. But he was being booed is the main point, and he was. And he's been booed ever since he came back. Every appearance he makes, when they announce him in a final, he gets booed. And he's at peace with that. He said, yeah, okay, I'm the villain, that's fine. But you need that. That brings people in. It's like, okay, yeah, ooh, the evil Justin Gatlin's in the race. Let's go and root against him and hope he loses. And we want Hussein to win because he's the legitimate champion, not this cheater, this two-time cheater. So yeah, it's perfect. He fits into the narrative. It works. So he's also bankable when he comes back. So yeah, they want him in the meet. So those appearance fees, he's going to get those because they want him. He's top flight. I mean, he's finalining in world championships. So yeah, you want him at your meet, and you're going to get the people who are going to come out. Just like it's just you get a handful of fans who want to boom. That's a handful that wouldn't have been there. So it's like, yeah, he's bankable, so he works. Apologies. This is considered sort of the ultimate step where you say, yes, I did it. Please forgive me. Gatlin didn't apologize. He never took responsibility. And we're going to look, the final case is kind of an apology. The responsibility is taken in all of this. And again, I like this one, never ruin an apology with an excuse. Well, we're going to see that oftentimes athletes like to throw in an excuse even when they apologize. So if you are unintentional or non-performance one, intentional and performance, those are kind of the worst sort of scenarios for you. Media attention can really force an apology because you need to address the situation. They're going to want to know what's going on with you. Lack of fan support or system support can also drive you to an apology as a way to maybe kind of saving yourself a little bit. But you still have to have sort of a remnant of your career left to have an apology. You can't use an apology if that will end your career. So it still needs to be this notion of career interruption going on. And again, that's different than corporations have with this. It's career interruption. And who is this? Yeah. Yes, Maria Sharapova, who was commonly had the most income from sponsorships of any other female athlete. Even when she was regularly losing to Serena Williams, she would out-earn Serena Williams in terms of sponsorship deals. That trend has shifted in the past few years, but Maria Sharapova was very bankable. If you have ever been to a Nike store during the height of her career, that's all you could see in terms of tennis. It was Maria Sharapova playing in Nike apparel. It should be remarked, Nike was one of the few sponsors to stick with Tiger Woods during his troubles because Nike Golf was Tiger Woods. What were they going to do? They had built their brand on Tiger. Tiger goes off the rails, and they're like, we don't have anybody else. So it's like, yeah, it's like we're still backing him. Maybe he'll come back, Good luck with that sex therapy you're going to go to. Because he was a sexaholic on his problems. Well, Maria's case is kind of interesting because she kind of apologizes, but did she really apologize? And she takes her ban as a result. Here's her statement. She was right there when this happened. She makes a statement. I received a letter from the ITF that I had failed a drug test at the Australian Open. I take full responsibility for it. Well, that looks like an apology. I'm taking full responsibility for this. All right. So this is more of it. It's very important for you to know and understand that 10 years this medicine was not banned, was not on WADA's ban list, and I had legally been taking it, and that's that meldonium, which people say, oh, it sounds sinister, it sounds like a fake, like something out of a cartoon character. Oh, I was taking meldonium. She had been taking it for a very long time. It had been prescribed. January 1st of that year, it was now on the ban list. She argued that she didn't read that email, and it actually had been emailed to her. That's how they did it. They sent out emails like, don't take this drug anymore. She missed that email. And I was given this medication by my doctor for several health issues that I was having in 2006. Actually, that's what I think the curler tested positive for was meldonium in this Olympics. Throughout my long career, I've been very open and honest about many things, and I take great responsibility and professionalism in my job every single day, and I made a huge mistake. So she's kind of like, yeah, I messed up. She didn't. It was sort of unintentional, but I messed up here. I took this drug. I'm going to be banned, and yeah, I'm going to live with that. So this is sort of her apology, because she's saying she feels badly for her fans and who've been supporting her through her career, that she kind of let them down. You know, I got caught because I didn't read my emails. And it was funny to watch the sports writers debate, just like, how could she not read her emails? Like, well, I get a lot of emails. I don't read them all. Oh, but, this is really important. Wouldn't you, when it says WADA in the heading, wouldn't you read it? And so I was like, okay, all right. And maybe she needs someone to kind of read her emails for her. But anyway, so some of the lessons from this. The value of revenue generation. Sharapova is bankable. You want her at events. When she came back, the problem is when you've been gone from tennis for 2 years, you're not ranked anymore. And while you want to play in a major, you need to either be ranked, or you need to get a wild card, or you got to play your way in. Well, when he had his bad career collapse, Agassi played his way back in. Because he felt he had no one to blame but himself, and he worked his way back in. Well, Sharapova went to the Grand Slam. The first one up was the French Open, and she asked for a wild card. And there was some great debate about this, whether or not they should give her a wild card. The wild cards are typically reserved for young and upcoming stars. And both in the US, the UK, Australia, and the USA, they kind of have an agreement where they allow their upcoming stars in, so they each move those around. Well, she once won in it. That's not unheard of, that sometimes when players come off of injury, they also lose their rankings, and they're often given a wild card in. She was not given a wild card into the French. And this, again, was debated among sports writers. Many of them saying, well, this is crazy. She's a draw. Why don't they want her in there? You want her in the field. She's going to draw in fans. She's going to bring people in. In part, people love her, or they hate her, so you kind of have this counter. People tend to not be neutral on Sharapova. It's kind of love or hate. So she can also be the villain and play the villain role as well. But she draws them in. They did give her the wild card for Wimbledon. She did come in through Wimbledon. And unfortunately for, I think, the number 2 seed, she played her in the opening round, and Sharapova actually beat her. So that was... The other female tennis players were not happy about the wild cards at all, because they thought she needed to earn her way back in, and they didn't think it should be given it to her. And they also knew that could really disrupt their draws, because now suddenly early on, such as the case of a top 4 seed, you're hitting someone in the first round who actually could eliminate you instead of playing someone who's like 200 in the world or like 65th. There's a big difference between them and Sharapova's game, even though she had been off for a while. She had system support. Many of her sponsors stayed with her. Nike, Head, and Evian all stayed with her. They didn't drop her. She did lose some sponsors. They were more, the best word is peripheral sponsors. These Nike and Head, those are sports. Those are her apparel. That's her tennis racket. Evian's water. I mean, yeah, that's kind of peripheral. Anyone can have water. But she had some other ones related to sort of cosmetics and that type of stuff. Well, that's not really related. She's easy to replace on those if you think about it. If I'm Nike, it's hard to replace her because you go back and you look at Nike was heavily using her. And the same with Head Tennis Racket. Like, no, we want to keep you. You're a top player. We want you using our racket. So those stayed with her. And it was minimal punishment from the association. This was a slap. 2 years was just a slap on the wrist. And if I have my sponsorship deal still in place, I still have a source of revenue. So yeah, I can make do. This is just kind of a career interruption. So I can apologize, I can embrace it, say this is bad, and I can come back. And the fan support helps too, and that's related to the revenue. She's bankable. You want her there. So again, so she's in it at Wimbledon because she gets the wild card for that. It's the same way she gets in at the U.S. Open. And now she on and off has injury problems, but she has the fan support again because they either love her or they hate her, but she draws. They want her there. The sponsors want her there because the sponsors know that's more attention for them to kind of bring it in. So again, when you see this context is very different here because corporations don't have this. You don't, as a corporation, when you're Volkswagen, you don't have a sponsor. And those groups aren't going to help you out. So essentially, you need an accurate read of these contextual modifiers, and that's critical for these athlete reputational crises. So as an athlete, you kind of have to assess your terrain and say, really, where am I at? Am I going to get some support? Can I get some support from my team, from my association? What are my sponsors going to do? They're going to stick with me. They're going to go away. If they go away, will they promise to come back when I come back? And do the fans love me or hate me? At least they want to see me. Because again, it's love or hate, they want to see you. And this idea of career threat or interruption, I can't reinforce that enough. That's going to be a huge decision for a lot of these athletes. They're going to go to very extreme circumstances and say almost ludicrous things in their denials, like the whiskey defense. And there was another one too he was talking about. There's just like, I don't think there's any science for that, but got to try. I think they just sit there and think it's worth a shot, It's like, because if it goes, it goes. And so just to kind of wind up here, if we kind of look at some of the contextual modifiers here, we need to look about attributions about the crisis itself, whether it's performance or non-performance. Non-performance typically is easier to handle. However, we also have to be aware that there are some very, very bad non-performance things you can do as an athlete that fans really don't want to forgive you for and would really like to see your career ended for. Domestic abuse is one of them, but you can do other kind of very serious things. I'll give you an example, though, that sometimes this stuff teams and fans let go. There was another football player also who played for the Ravens, and the Ravens are not unusual. There was at 1 year, there were almost 200 crimes committed by NFL players in 1 year. So this happens. So another one of their players is one of their star linebackers, Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis was the team leader, the heart and soul of the team. Okay. Prior to when he led them to the Super Bowl championship, Ray Lewis and a group of his associates were out. They were believed to be, maybe not if involved, directly witnesses to a murder. Ray Lewis obstructed that investigation, never did cooperate, never did anything, may have actually been complicit in or at least had knowledge of a murder that he never, ever would be willing to talk to authorities about. That is a truly bad non-performance related issue. The following year, Ray Lewis leads his team to the Super Bowl. Ray Lewis is hailed as this great leader. To this day, you'll find Ray Lewis as a commentator on television, and he's also a very highly sought-after motivational speaker. Yet people only occasionally will the press bring up, but he didn't do anything about that murder investigation. Why doesn't Ray Lewis ever tell us the truth about that? But he was a great athlete. He did great things for his team. The team was willing to overlook it. The fans have overlooked it. And to a large degree, they've embraced it. And the system has embraced Ray Lewis. And he'll go into the Hall of Fame as soon as his time is ready for that. But, like I said, he's a sportscaster. He's making a lot of money out of this. That, to me, seems like a pretty significant event. But that was the case where the media decided, well, we'll let it go because everyone else kind of loves him. The system supported him. Whether it's intentional or unintentional matters, and it seems like almost everything's unintentional by these athletes. They never meant to have that happen. I know there was another U.S. sprinter who said, well, I took this cold medication when I was in Jamaica, and I think it had that stuff in it. It's like, well, be careful about that in the future. He actually is back performing. The severity of the non-performance, I think, matters, although even then, sometimes that can get eclipsed by other things. Because these response choices and effectiveness, the fan and system support, the revenue generation, sometimes is a gray area or not, and the career threat, all play a really big role, and you kind of have to take that into consideration when you're trying to evaluate what athletes are doing. And particularly that last one with career threat, it really does help to explain denial, because people will like to critique the athletes about their denials, because some of them are so ludicrous, but it's very easy to explain why, because of the career threat that's going on there. And again, you don't have a lot of that in the corporate world. Most of the time, admitting it and having a problem, it's not going to end your company in the same way. So I just wanted to kind of lead you through today some of the stuff that's going on in terms of sport and crisis and how the rules change because of the industry, and the sports industry is kind of unique. And the reason I wanted to focus on the individual athlete is there are that's where most of your crises are going to be. Yeah, teams do have crises, and they handle them similar to organizations, but think of all the athletes. And you have so many athletes in sports, the Winter Olympics are a good example of that, that are not team-based, really. I mean, there's still individual athletes that are out there. So there's a lot more opportunity for that to occur. And so it's a fascinating thing to watch. The media focuses on it, and it's something we should be interested in. And this is just kind of one of the ideas, one of the directions that both the research but also the practice of crisis communication needs to go in the future, is to be much more industry specific, to try and understand how the context within the particular industry you're working in or helping a client in, how that shapes and affects what crisis communication can look like within that particular industry.